All right, fantastic. Well, I'm pleased today to be here for another episode of the InsurTech Leadership Podcast. And on today's episode, we're going to talk about the fact that everybody wants an AI story. Most end up with an AI pilot and nothing changes in production. Claims still bog down, servicing still escalates, and ops teams are still stitching together work together across systems. My guest today is Jake Sloan. He is VP of Global Insurance at Appian and an operator by background. He's run large operations, owned $150 million P&L, and delivered the kind of first-in-history transformations that only happen when you understand how work actually moves handoffs, exceptions, controls, and accountability. In this conversation, we'll get blunt about why pilots fail, what the winning 90-day deployment looks like, and why the keys to ROI aren't just another chatbot. It's the workflow, the orchestration and governance layer that makes AI and automation actually stick. Welcome, Jake.
Thanks, Josh. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. Thanks for joining me today on the podcast. So let's jump into it. Maybe we could just pick up on my intro there and jump right into kind of, your thoughts. I know Appian was big in the low code, no code front, and everyone's talking about AI, Gen AI, agentic AI, et cetera, et cetera. So, what are your thoughts on kind of the AI revolution and how Appian is approaching it?
Yeah, it's great to be here. So, if you look at the evolution of, kind of the low code and no code, and, we were one of the first to go public in the low code space. And when you think about, how, tech is 20%, code, 80% psychology, and a lot of it's really getting the buy-in from the leaders around them. So what we see is through this kind of proliferation and this kind of rapid acceleration, if you will, is as we move into AI, agentic AI. We see the underwriters and claims leaders and such. They don't want black boxes. They want humans in the loop and systems where they can remain the captain and AI be the navigator, if you will. And so, from that place, if you're doing that through, custom code and the old ways we used to do things, in contrast to, visual design methods, just to kind of make it more generic, and the speed that goes with those visual design methods, that's the curve that we've been on. And it's great to be, leading as part of that.
Yeah, great. So you have an interesting perspective, given the fact that you've had senior leadership roles in industry organizations, and then now you've been kind of on the technology side, the vendor side, so to speak. And so maybe you could just share a little bit more about your background and kind of how that shapes your perspective and approach in the insurance side at Appian.
Yeah, sure. So if you look, I have two kind of chapters I joke about, tech and then technology, and then insurance technology. And I found my way to the insurance tech as maybe being kind of overly critical from the operations side of, why are my teams and I having to input spreadsheets and, 6 windows, and there's got to be a better way to do this. So that's, kind of how my journey unfolded. And I'm proud of it, but yet in hindsight, I probably could have done that a little differently to be more collaborative, because even to this day, there's still kind of the IT and business, and they kind of point fingers at each other. But yeah, that's how I found my way. And being part of an organization such as Appian and all the incredible work that the founders that are still hands-on today that they continue to do, we have really taken what is the Appian platform and pointed that at the insurance and healthcare payer industry. And I had a small taste of that, over 10 years ago, when I was part of Aon and the flood services team there. And it was a classic example of taking, 3 disparate, platforms that had been, grown through acquisition, and, your best customers on system 1, your best system features on 2, and, the largest policy base on 3, and you're trying to blend those into one, and the path forward and what that could look like. And found both the company and the technology to be incredibly interesting. And then I'm here in my 8th year now this year with the team.
Got it. So I'm curious, so sort of teased talking about pilots and AI pilots in particular. So I don't know if this is an AI pilot specific question or just a pilot specific question, but given your experience both as an operator and as a technologist or working with technologists, what would you say is like the biggest mistake from operators, and what would you say is maybe the biggest mistake from technologists? And are they the same thing, or are they different things?
I think they're similar. I mean, we kind of joke around here about the pilot purgatory, is that, they want to go into pilots, and, so maybe if you take it, through the lens of the operator, maybe they've had years of underinvestments, and, they've been working through, email still seems to be, one of the largest used tools, especially on the underwriting and the broker agent side. But maybe the business has, reached that point where they can no longer, have the human be the glue between the systems, flipping windows, flipping spreadsheets, and so on. And if you look at this through the technology lens, kind of going back to my open there, as far as, me personally critical back early in my career, now I realize from the other side of the aisle that it's not like the leadership teams on the technology side are sitting on their hands. There's a lot of competing priorities, whether that be regulatory and risk, whether that be security and other compliance aspects. So when we see this kind of pilot purgatory, it's taking maybe 5 to 10 years of underinvesting and the business side. It's taking the tech debt that's mounted, and the path that we like to advocate and go forward with, is to start with something that's pre-built. So if a pre-built solution, Appian offers a couple, one is connected underwriting, one's connected claims. So let's just say that you're talking about an underwriting, team that wants to make up lost time on accelerating the submission, intake, the triage, the clearance. Being able to start with a perspective and go forward with that is a way to bring both together. If you look at the leadership within the organizations, I know all the great work that you do. If you think about how you're adding leaders, or if you want to really, maximize the leader, we see that a great, colleague experience typically means a great customer experience, and using, technology to really facilitate that, to keep your colleagues engaged. But in summary, it's bringing them both together so that you can have both, maybe a pilot if you truly want to do a proof of technology, yet already have the plans ahead of time for how you're going to take that into production, and then be open and communicative on both sides. And, doing that through agile methods. Maybe the organization's still waterfall, maybe they're agile in between. There's a lot of change culture that has to go with this, that sometimes it's not overlooked. I don't want to paint that, but it's maybe sometimes assumed that the culture will just naturally respond, when all the while there's oftentimes, individuals maybe on both sides that are, maybe the business initially that, hey, my job might go away because of this new capability. And now we're seeing more and more some, developer angst as it relates to some of these, capabilities that are both inside of our platform, as well as an agentic AI capability, that both sides maybe, have questions that aren't answered, that they can all kind of fill their line on.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was listening to a podcast, and they were talking about Shopify, and the CEO of Shopify, I think, has a pretty well-known, I think it's called the Red Queen memo or something like that he put out. But they're actually incentivizing people to use tokens, and so the more tokens you use in models, the more it's viewed as you're helping to drive the innovation of the business forward, which I thought was kind of an interesting change management strategy to kind of get people to be less afraid of this is going to replace me, and more engaged in, all right, how can I use this to make myself more valuable to the company?
Absolutely.
So it's interesting.
Yeah, I think we'll continue to see, innovative perspectives. I mean, who would have thought we'd be talking about tokens yet? How key a role token plays now in the landscape between both the business and the technology side.
Yeah. So I do have a follow-up question, because it makes a lot of sense what you're describing in terms of kind of, bringing them a perspective, having something that at least they can maybe react to and use as a starting point. But I also know a lot of people in this industry feel like, they're special, they're unique. And so how do you kind of balance that?
Yeah, well, yeah. Off camera, I have my unicorn, skit, but I know. Kidding aside, we show up in organizations, and I suppose maybe, my personal consumer preferences, I show up at somewhere, buy new clothes or a different vehicle, and I'm like, I'm the unicorn. But what we do is you really have to listen, right? You all too often we feel like that both sides are saying a lot of similar things, yet the organizations maybe don't realize. Maybe the word custom, or we're bespoke. Our customers don't want that what's out of the box. And so from the Appian side, to maybe start there, we're very intentional about creating configure versus customized. So configurable paths. So we don't presuppose that your underwriting path that you're taking for your organization is exactly the same as the entire globe, because of course it's not. Yet it should also, though, allow it to be configurable. So you can, if you're underwriting, maybe bicycle insurance in the Netherlands, you're underwriting, farmer and ranch in Australia, or you're underwriting maybe, innovative new products like cyber, that you should have the ability to configure that to your 100% liking. We're not apologetic for that. You've got to get to 100%. Yet in the next breath, I'll say that you can't, take years and, weeks and weeks and months and years to do that. It's got to be scalable. Otherwise, you're going to create the next, monolith and tech debt monster. And then the next breath, if we talk through kind of, I mentioned before about some of the culture, we offer an innovative workshop that, it's the future of industry is what we call it. And it can be underwriting, claims. It could be, HR. I know that's especially focused for you, where we're talking about what is, unique to that aspect of the business. And we bring in principles from design thinking, systems thinking. We really try to challenge individuals. Those are the leaders today that are already running the business. They're good enough. How do you take them from, that not to be cliche, but, good to great? And how do you use the technology to work harder for them versus their colleagues having to be, struggling and be, kind of aligned and chained to these kind of old systems that struggle. But those are just, kind of some of the ideas that come up. I'm curious from your chair if that resonates with what you see across, kind of the HR and career space.
Yeah, no, I think it does. I think a lot of times people are so embedded in the day-to-day that they find, small ways to work around their problems. And then you just keep kind of going down the path. And then you don't realize kind of how you end up with a chain of workarounds, as opposed to maybe we need to step back and kind of look at the big picture of the workflow and how we're doing things. I don't necessarily think that technology is always the key. I mean, I think, part of it, the reality is that's usually where innovation comes from, is people have a problem, they get frustrated with it, so they figure out how to fix it. And I think the idea of technology, coming in and now we got to redesign our workflow around the technology seems backwards to me. It should be more bottom up. So that's kind of what I'm seeing. And I think sometimes HR isn't always viewed as strategic in the way it should be. And so it can end up lagging a bit more in terms of workflow, process, technology, and the combination of them.
Yeah, no, great point. And yet, if you look at a new colleague coming in, which, the industry has a stigma that, we have to work through as far as, attracting new talent. And to your point, your best and brightest, there's bright spots in every organization. Yet, what are you doing to really, help them, stand up and stand out? And, if I'm having to now take my team that, that's unicorn-ish, I feel like, and I'm very proud of what my brand or what my team has accomplished, and who isn't, to have to go unwind all that to fit to some rigid, technology, that's just not the path forward. Now, of course, if you're a critic to that, you say, well, how are you going to achieve scale and drive price down? And agree. Yet that's where this middle ground with, either, low code or visual design and configurable, type components. That's where, personally, we're very excited about the agentic AI capability, that you're going to make your people even better. Your people are your core assets, where we come from, and agentic's going to make them better, in contrast to replace them entirely, which is sometimes, I think, the anxiety when we go into an organization and we start talking about it. But if you've got bad process, you don't need technology to fix bad process. You need process improvement, and then go from there.
So you mentioned like the different types of experts that you'll bring in early on. I mean, does that, when you talk about process, does that mean you kind of start at the whiteboard, or maybe it's a virtual whiteboard these days, and really sort of try to look at the process and then try to share what those best practices are, and then maybe bring some of those pre-built workflows to the table and kind of step through it like that.
Exactly. And we're, I don't want to say we're old school, but we still like to be in person, and we find that there's, organizations, kind of the return to office. We still see there's kind of two sides of that, either you are or you are not, but we would prefer to do it in person, because what you said is key. You live this too, that getting people to kind of snap out of their daily, kind of busy work and really focus on this is key. And we of course have a virtual format that we can do. And then we gather artifacts around. So if we're talking about, maybe a new HR benefits use case, and we want to kind of coalesce around that as a problem and a focus area, we bring in, value engineers. We ask for as many artifacts as we can gather. If you look at KPIs and maybe you see a trend that, maybe it's 1% and it's incremental, but oh, by the way, it's been sustainably declining for 3 years. And we just can kind of explain it away as, it's in the tech debt, or it's this organization, or it's that. Those are kind of some of the key kind of data components. And then with every data element comes a story, and understanding those individuals. Maybe they proactively tried to move something, from an onshore data organization to maybe offshore. Maybe they tried RPA and had some lift, but they didn't fully realize that. And so you'll see those stories start to evolve. But we bring in, value engineers. We bring in a number of our industry team is comprised of, former C-level experts across various functions, whether it be, claims, whether it be underwriting. We bring in our customer success team, which is our services team. And we also work through, various partners. And the best part of all of this is that we do that at no cost to the organization. So we generously invest, because it's something that, both helps change the industry, change the perception of software, as well as then we will get every time, and I say that bullishly, we will every time get to a point where we can justify a return on that investment in weeks, maybe it's 90 days, in contrast to something that's going to be a 5 or a 7 year ROI, because there's also that pain pill that we're dealing with, which is, we tried this before and it failed. And that's the difference between an agile, software like Appian in contrast to some of the monoliths.
And is part of that ability to get an ROI that quick because you kind of start with a smaller workflow and expand out from there? And kind of how do you think of like overall workflow or sub workflows and kind of roll it out?
Yeah, it's a great question. So some of this is, transparently, there's not a lot of magic to it. It's really process improvement. So if you used to go, A to B to C to D to E to F, and now you're just going, you can go A to F without having to do all of that, but yet you need to have, transparency and visibility into the process and maybe a random sampling. So there's just some very non-exciting, process improvement that we pick up through what I would kind of, lump into tech debt. There's that. And then there's also maybe more how you're working now. So those small sub processes, maybe today, we've gotten to a point where we're looking at multiple systems, disparate data, if you will, disparate systems that are siloed. And we bring those together with a capability we call data fabric. And so it unifies all those disparate systems. And then we, sometimes it'll be as simple as maybe a workflow task that can kick off as part of those small sub processes that feed to maybe a main process. And then, if you look at the newest features, using agentic AI, using large language models to really, take, maybe 5 or 6, kind of iterations of small process that now are ready to be, aggregated. And what does this submission mean to an underwriter? And then if you want the human still in the loop, excellent. We'll put that human right there in the loop. They can read and, give them, X%, confidence that this should be passed through, or in some cases, and in fact, in a number of cases on more simple products, we can just straight through process that right to a policy admin or a claims admin, and continue it, so that you're really leaving your best, colleagues for the best edge cases that are exceptions or very complex, being able to take an offshore, wind farm or some sort of a very massive commercial risk, and give that benefit to your team or team of colleagues through that small process conjoined to large process and so on. But yeah, that's structurally how we do it.
So I'm curious, is there one particularly absurd workaround that you've seen inside an enterprise level team
It,
across your projects?
yeah, that's a great. I haven't been asked that. That's a great question. I think for me, the anxiety or the absurd workaround is how much reliance there is on spreadsheets and email. I mean, it truly blows our minds sometimes at how many hundreds of millions of dollars in premium are attached to some of the most robust spreadsheets. And I'm sure if I go look hard, there's maybe a spreadsheet hall of fame out there. If there isn't one, maybe we should advocate for that. But
Yeah.
it's insane the amount of email and spreadsheets, and they all have controls. So I don't want to mince words here. It's secure, it's controlled, but it's just the amount of complexity that's been crammed into an old tool because they just haven't made or haven't been able to make the investment in new tools. It is pretty absurd. So yeah.
I got one more on that front. What about you mentioned people saying, "Oh, we've tried this before" or whatever, but I'm curious, is there anything you've seen that like looks fantastic in a deck, but then when people go try to implement it in ops, it consistently backfires?
Yeah, there's a couple. I mean, when you think about the kind of AI as its own thing, we'll see organizations that approach, like here's the core of the business, and then we're going to go do that new AI thing that our board wants us to do. So, detaching that is, that's what we would recommend as a misstep from the start. In contrast to making that a cohesive and combined motion, right? AI belongs inside of process, it belongs inside your organization, and they should very much coexist with having the human across the top and having that human in the loop. But those come up, and then some of the legacy traps we see where maybe carriers are looking to innovate and they're shackled to a 30-year mainframe. So either they think they have to go do a data lake or a data swamp is what we kind of joke about, or they feel like they have to go get that core admin system upgrade done before they can start innovating. And so that's kind of some of the misconceptions that we really align to. We have fantastic tech partnerships with some of the biggest core admin systems, with some of the biggest data providers. And so we call it an early value realization or a start now, just a truly an MVP type approach, where you're beginning, you're getting started, yet that old adage of begin with the end in mind. So if you know that you're going to migrate, maybe that's a 2 to a 5 year strategy, then begin with that in mind, that we don't know what the APIs or the endpoints are going to be, but we know what they are today, and we know that our underwriters or our claims examiners are bogged down today, and how you can very intentionally design that. And then it's an old book I read a while back, but the quote was that you could literally drive from New York to San Diego with just the light, that comes from your headlights at night. And if you think about before you had GPS or before you had all this, we could. And now, admittedly, there's much better ways. In fact, we wouldn't drive at all. We'd fly. Of course we would. Right. But the point being that, you don't have to know everything. You just have to have a very astute team that kind of anticipates this and just get started. I see all too many times organizations just want to continue to either pilot purgatory or pontificate before you know it, and especially as fast as things are moving now, you're just the gap that's leaving you further and further behind.
So I'm sure you have opportunities that kind of bubble up from people in the trenches and organizations who feel like there's got to be a better way, and then you probably have others that come from the top down where leadership's like, we need better visibility or whatever it is, and so we want to look at making some changes regardless of which direction it comes from. I'm just curious, are there ways you see companies have better alignment between leadership and the folks that actually are tasked with making things happen, and any advice you would give?
Great question. We see both camps, and I would tell you that probably the worst that I don't want to paint, but it is when IT forces a kind of a strategy, and we see that sometimes, and we see it in fact even in big organizations. So I personally come from the place that IT follows the business. The business is the pulse, the colleagues in the trenches, no matter what level those colleagues are committed and devoted to your brand and don't ever look past that. And I really, applaud organizations that invest in culture, and most do. And then when you have likewise at the top, and you have C-level leaders that are accountable to moving the dial, and that's the bold. You've got to bring the organization along. And sure, change culture and some of the things that we've got to go sign up for. And today with some of the profitability challenges that you see, or some of the rapidly changing dynamics with whether it be new products, parametric products, and so on. There's a lot of questions, and there are more questions than there are answers. Yet, if you can bring both of those together, top down, communicate the strategies that we're going to take 40% of the expense out of the business in the next 2 years. Bottom up, take your best and brightest, and don't just cherry pick, right? Pick individuals that, age or tenure or, aptitude. Like, sometimes we see some of the most exciting, colleagues that are advocates for change are some of the longest tenured. And sometimes the perception is that, oh, you got to bring in new talent to do this. And absolutely not. You can do this with existing colleagues that are contributing. And, we see that it's a good career stretch on both sides of the aisle. It'd be for business that's maybe taking on transformation, and IT that's taking on modernization. But I think that, for those organizations, the ones that we've seen struggle, the other side of the story here are the organizations that don't have those investments in good, transformation, and good, culture and a lot of the work. And we've got, and this is where it goes beyond software. We've got a host of different, resources, and there's great resources from you, I'm sure, in your teams, but they're just, if they haven't made that intentional, when the organization goes to this change culture, it can get a little wobbly.
Do you have any thoughts, kind of more broadly, either in your own business or observing some of these organizations, as to, you came into Appian with a tremendous amount of domain expertise already. You hear about entry-level jobs going away and these sort of things, but yet the insurance industry talks about we need to attract more young people into the industry because people are going to retire out with all this domain expertise. I mean, I have some of my own kind of thoughts on this, but I'm just curious, like either in terms of observations of best practices in this time period that you're seeing amongst your clients, or either how you're thinking about, what the future of your team will look like.
Certainly. Yeah, I think that, if you look at, prior companies, that very, very proud of the organizations that I've been, very grateful to be part of that because of their investments in, talent and culture programs. And Appian is absolutely, it's admittedly, it's, I crossed over to this is my first software experience. So I don't gauge against many yet. It's been incredible with the culture investments here. And, so if you look at, for instance, underwriter burnout, we see that, retention has been, a bit of an issue in underwriting because the burnout can be high. The bar, back when I was with, one of the carriers I was with, we kept seeing talent turnover. We'd hire them, we'd get them through training, get on the floor, and, they would just, this is not for me. And so we started to do what we called realistic job previews, where we would sit them out there side by side and let them understand. And so if you kind of, fast forward to where we are now, and you take something like, our connected underwriting solution, it's specifically, it's an AI mailbox, it's triage agents. And so we're not building AI to replace underwriters. We're really building it to save them, from, kind of email hell that they live in today. And so if you take that as just one example of many, and you look at how, if the goal is to retract, more interest, to attract and more interest coming in, it's through, iterative benefit like this. Yet, I think that someone that's convinced themselves that they can just do it all with technology is missing out. At the same time, do you need as many people as you have today? No, likely not, because there is an element of underinvestment or of tech that's accumulated. But when we start thinking about just it's not just an efficiency strategy; it's really a retention strategy. And kind of going back to what I said earlier, I'm a big advocate for how that colleague experience, determines, that customer satisfaction, because, if you've got a good employee experience and you use that to drive your experience. And back to your question about, kind of the colleagues in trenches, ask your customer what's important to them. They're going to have a perspective in how you fold that into either your business process, maybe it's concierge programs, yet often using technology to help, buffer some of the, it's not realistic to have, 20 treatments for a client base, yet you can have 20 different, you see it, IVR treatments or, workflow. And this is where, for us, the agentic capability and being able to provide a bespoke, kind of concierge experience for those layers, while also, continue to attract and retain your staff is key.
Great. Well, Jake, this has been a great conversation. Anything else in terms of advice you would give someone contemplating a pilot, or just anything else we haven't covered that you'd like to touch on before we wrap up?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Get started. That's the thing that we see. Some organizations that do a lot of analysis paralysis. We see I've belabored it, pilot purgatory, because it's a joke around the water cooler here, because there's a lot of organizations that just continue to do pilots, in contrast to taking a pilot, even if it's achieved 80% of the result, move that to production, then continue to iterate on it successfully. So it just gets started, and if you have questions, reach out to us. We would be glad to lend without that heavy sales kind of burden that kind of goes with, I think, some perception. There's a tremendous amount of resource out there as well on different podcasts such as yours and websites. But in summary, get started, because if you've been delaying that, or or likewise, maybe you started and it didn't work, excellent. Unpack that, peel that back, and try to figure out, maybe the tech was great, maybe the process was broken, maybe the culture of adoption was struggling. But just don't take your eye off of that, because as fast as things are moving, as rapidly as things are changing, as well as climate, geopolitics, all the other variables that go into this, you just cannot take your eye off of that innovation and investing in your organizations that way. Yeah,
well, appreciate that advice. And if someone would like to learn something more specifically about Appian, the website, your LinkedIn, anything else?
Yeah, please. All of those are great at Appian.com, or you can reach me directly, Sloan at Appian.com, and would be great to engage with you.
All right, fantastic. Well, Jake Sloan, VP of Global Insurance at Appian, thanks so much for joining me on the InsurTech Leadership Podcast.
Thank you, Josh. It's been great. Talk soon.